Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Joanna McLemore, and I am one of two high school PE teachers at Central High School. And today we have Dr. Eckler with us for motivating students in secondary PE. Wanted to tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Eckler is a passionate physical educator who has spent time teaching physical education and health in all areas of our educational system. He has spent time teaching elementary, middle, and high school physical education, as well as currently educating future physical education teachers at the University of Louisville. He has several research interests, but he's currently fixated on teaching impact behaviors and their contribution to successful student outcomes. He's a father of three boys, very active boys, and he enjoys much of his free time backpacking, hiking, camping, and enjoying nature's playground. I'm excited for this because I know probably you guys share the same thing. It's not hard motivating those students that love PE, but what do we do for those students who, don't feel the most comfortable in that setting? So I'm looking forward to the presentation.
All right. Well, I'm glad to be here, and I'm going to try or attempt to, and sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't, but I'm going to attempt to share my screen. You should see, hopefully, um, a little slide here. It's got a couple of things on it, but before I talk to you about what that is, I just want to I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being a part of this, being willing to come and learn. Hopefully, I'm so happy to be here and to be able to share some of my passions with you, not only in regard to physical education and movement, but also what has become somewhat of a passion for me in terms of student motivation. The process that led me to trying to gain understanding and gain insight into this area of our profession has really been a convoluted one, but it's been in part stimulated by a question that I pursued while I was getting my dissertation in preparation for the position I'm in now. Um, it was a question that I kept going back to and was honestly prompted by one of my mentors to try to find answers for. And it was that question that Joanna just kind of eloquently put is how do I motivate students or the student that doesn't want to necessarily be here? How do I motivate that person? And there's all different types, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But how do I motivate that student that doesn't want to be there? At the elementary level, I felt, at least for the most part, when I taught, students were so excited to come and see me in the gymnasium. Um, but as my career changed, or my career path changed in my time in secondary physical education and moving into the middle school and high school level, it seemed as though as they aged, their motivation to move and even engage in physical activity began to vacate. I always tell my students it's almost as if the students were like slow leaking tires. Um, if you've ever experienced this, you know that uh, everything's fine. You know, the tire's fully inflated, you got good tire pressure, and then all of a sudden you wake up one morning, usually when you're late for work or something like that, and you have this flat tire and you're not able to go anywhere. Um, to kind of like continue with that analogy, it's as if these students gain this through adolescence and through all the changes in their body that are occurring during that time. It's almost if they gain a slow leak, and so um, they're as they age and move into the secondary, into high school, those students that are unwilling to move have lost their willingness to really engage in our content. So today, my goal is not to expand on any type of theoretical motivational theory. I know that some of you probably are disappointed in that. Actually, probably none of you are disappointed in that. I'm going to be talking theoretically, but um, my goal today is to really explain what motivation actually is for these students, to kind of start at that base level, what contributes to it, and then hopefully provide you with some basic or at least functional tools and strategies that you can use to guide your own practice. I'm hopeful that this isn't just one of these 1 hour check the box professional developments. I hope you gain something from it. Obviously, that's my largest goal. Whether it's the tools and strategies and the advice I give you, I don't know. But I really want a call to action to happen here today. A call to action to not only utilize some of the things I give you. Maybe some of you will, maybe some of you won't. But the call to action really revolves around, I want to create a space where you feel comfortable coming to me and asking me questions. This is my first time in front of a lot of you. I'm seeing some of the names, and I've met and talked to some of you. But a lot of times, this is a way that I can create kind of a bridge for connection. And that's what I really want to do. That's really what my overall goal is. I hope that this is the start of a series that we can talk about motivation, and I can get, when we're face to face and able to really explore some of these things. I know through a survey that we did with me recently that a lot of you all want activities. You want ideas in for your class, and so given the virtual space, I'm not really necessarily able to do that. So as well, but hopefully this will be the first of a series of opportunities that we're able to explore this. Some of the outcomes that I do hope to get to beyond just connecting is I want to hopefully introduce you, if you're not familiar, to what motivation is. I want to go through some of what the research, we're not going to get bogged down in the research, but I want to tell you a little bit about what some of the research says. I want to try to give you some ideas on how to increase and or decrease motivation, and we'll talk about what I mean by decrease motivation. And I'm going to introduce you to an acronym that is used in our field to help encourage and create a motivational climate in your classroom. And then hopefully I'm going to provide you with some very practical tools that you can utilize to gain access to information on individual motivation, because that's really the whole thing, is gaining information about your students so that you're able to then use that information to motivate them. That's really what we're going to try to do. All right. And that's really it. That's our outcomes. Along the way, if you need to ask questions, I know Joanna will be there moderating that. If you have a comment, please share. If I don't get to it during our time, because time is kind of tight, I will respond in some way. There is a couple of things on this slide, ways you can connect with me. You got the QR code there for my email. You also have that Instagram QR code there. So it looks a little bit different, but essentially it takes you to our Instagram page for our program. I run that. So if you want to connect with me that way, that'd be awesome. If you want to follow me, that'd be awesome, because then I'll follow you back and I get to see your program, which is awesome. I love seeing what you all are doing. And it's one way that I can connect with you even further. And I really encourage you to do that. Also, if you just want to do the old school, write an email. My email address is right there on there as well. All right. And then finally, before we get started, Joanna, I sent the slide deck to you yesterday. So you have that. Hopefully she'll send that to you if she gets the opportunity, or Mimi will, and you'll have access to any of that. Inside those are embedded audio clips. So don't feel like if I'm going through the slides, I've got to do all this reading. You just click the audio clip and you can kind of see it highlighted here. You can just click that, and it's essentially what I'm going to be giving you today. So you can feel free to use that if you'd like. So without further ado, let's get started on motivation. And I'll just count on you, Joanna, if we got any questions pushing forward. So the big 1,000-foot view here, or the big 1,000-foot view question, I guess I should say, is to start with is, what is motivation? So where does it come from? What is it? What does it consist of? So motivation, the word is a root word. The root word of it is movere, and that's the only Latin I'll speak today. I promise. It's the only Latin lesson I'll ever give in my life. But movere, and the definition of that Latin root word is really interesting to me, because it's simply defined as the act of movement, or to move. And it seems fitting, at least for me, that a professional development in physical education would focus on the actual root word of movement. That's where we get our word movement for. And so The word we know as motivation is defined so many different ways, but essentially these two definitions really stick out to me when I look through the research and have combed through all of the work that has been done in the motivational field. Both come from books that were written in the late 90s, and that's really when motivational research really took off in the education field, or at least it expanded um, to our physical education field. I've highlighted some words within each of those definitions, and I want to really break them down. Okay. And so we'll start with, like I said, just trying to make some foundational understandings of what motivation is. And you have a beautiful baby, and that's really awesome that there's a baby that is attending this professional development.
Thank you, Seth.
Mimi, make sure the baby gets an hour. All right. So the first word of the definition that I want to highlight and really want to sink into is process. This is our first kind of big takeaway for our session. Motivation, or the act of motivating individuals or even small groups or large groups, is a process. You aren't going to walk away from this professional development, or to be honest with you, you're not going to walk away with any professional development that you take in the future on motivation with an answer. I'm not going to give you a magic pill today. Okay, so if you're looking forward to that, I'm sorry to disappoint. That's because there isn't an answer. There isn't an answer to answer all of your motivational problems or issues that are surrounding your students. Believe me, I've checked for the answer. Remember, during my dissertation, I asked myself that question. I spent 96 pages trying to write about what the answer was, and at the conclusion, I decided that there wasn't an answer. There isn't an answer to all of those problems that we have. Motivating individuals is at best trial and error, and at worst a shot in the dark. Integrating some of the strategies that we use today and some of the tools, and creating an environment that is engaging and supportive does work. However, it is something it's important for us to understand that at a very basic level as educators, we're trying to hit a moving target. Actually, more than that, we're trying to hit moving targets. And oftentimes we try to do this with one bullet. We try to hit all of these moving targets with one bullet. And that bullet usually is, well, you're not going to get this grade. And that just doesn't work for a lot of our students. So we need to understand that we aren't going to motivate students who are apathetic about movement with a single strategy or even multiple strategies over a short period of time. Impacting motivational levels, again, I'm emphasizing this for a purpose. Motivating individuals is a process. You're not going to start the semester this coming fall just being able to motivate all your students. It's just not going to work. It's a process that you're going to have to work through. And so hopefully, like I said, we'll be able to give you some tools that will start that process for you. The second highlight that I want to discuss briefly is this idea of goal-directed activity. It's highlighted in the first definition as well. And if you read that kind of the entirety of that definition, it says that motivation is the process in which, again, that process word, in which goal-directed activity is instigated and sustained. Now, if I were to ask you, or ask your students, I guess, in any of your programs, let's say I asked 10 students what the goal or maybe the purpose of your course, or the goal of your physical education class, or even at kind of a micro level, what's the goal of your curriculum? What's the goal of your units? What's the goal of your lessons? Let's go even further. What's the goal of that specific activity in that specific lesson? What's the purpose of it? What is the goal that you're trying to reach? Now, I probably get some really good answers from some of your students. Usually those aren't the ones that we need to motivate. I'd probably get some bad answers. Those usually are. And I'd also probably get some of the typical adolescents, well, I don't know. But the purpose of this question is to really highlight the idea that most of our students don't really understand what we do. I ask students all the time, what's the purpose of what we do? What do we do as physical education teachers? What is our purpose? Why are we here? They don't understand what they're there for either. And so we can't motivate people. We can't motivate anyone if the goal-directed activity is blurry. We just can't do it. And so we need to make that clear for our students. So the purpose, really just kind of getting back to this ties into goal-directed activity because all of our behaviors, the students included, are goal-directed. So think about everything you do as an adult, whether it's going to work, going to the gym, going for a walk, or simply going out to eat. All of those behaviors or choices that you make, even unconsciously, are goal-directed to some degree. You go to work to earn money so that you can provide. You go to the gym to exercise so that you can keep your heart and your muscles and your bones healthy as you age. You go out to eat because the dishes have piled up in your sink and you don't want to do them and you don't have any more plates, right? So all of those behaviors and choices that we make are goal directed, right? So all of the behaviors that your students are making in your class are goal directed. So one of the big parts that we need to do as teachers is identify what that goal directed activity is, all right? So to provide you with a little bit of an example, sometimes that goal-directed activity, like I said, can be counter to what we want as a teacher. So counter to the desired behavior. To provide you an example, or at least a prompt to think about, let's say that you're in your program, you encourage through point acquisition, students dressing out, right? So dressing out is a part of how your students get a grade. A policy that or strategy that I see implemented a lot. So now let's say that of the entirety of your program, class, course, you can put all your courses together if you want, but let's say about 70% of the students dress out for class. Now that might be high for your program, it might be low, I'm not sure, but that's 7 out of every 10 people. So 70% of students are dressing out because why? What's the goal directed activity? They need points, right? They need points in order to get a passing grade in your class. They need to pass your class in order to graduate, to move forward, etc. Right? So the process of motivation through goal-directed activity, the goal-directed activity is dressing out, and then the behavior that they're trying to get, or the motivator behind that goal-directed activity, is the points. But what about that 30% that aren't dressing out? What's happening there? Now, in some cases, I've found that we as educators assume that the students are just apathetic. They just don't care. They don't care about the points. They don't care about the grade. And that might be true. That might be true for some of our students. Okay, so motivating them is going to be very tricky, right? But for others, for some of these students, there is just another goal-directed activity that is stronger than the behavior that you were desiring. So, for example, if the student has, let's say, let's just pick something. It could be a number of things, but let's say the student has poor self-image about their body. So the goal direction or the goal-directed activity is to avoid showing their body, right, to others, which in the locker room, or they don't feel comfortable going into the stall and changing out, going into the locker room in general, whatever it is, right? So that intrinsic motivator, through self-determination, right? So that self-interest, right? Self-interest, the expectations for those students to dress out in order to pass the class, that's not going to work. That's actually called a maladaptive attribution. So that's not something that you need to kind of take away, but that's something that actually is counter to what we want. If our desired behavior is for them to dress out and they have this other goal-directed activity that it's saying, I don't feel comfortable dressing out. I don't want to show my body to other people. I don't feel comfortable in that space, whatever that is. Dressing out is going to actually be counter to what we actually want. Because do we really care? Is the purpose of our job to have them dress out? Absolutely not. Really has nothing to do with it, right? We're trying to create physically literate individuals. We're trying to get them moving. And so what happens is we try to use the grade as the motivator, the points associated with that dressing out, and then they have this other intrinsic motivator that is pushing them to not dress out because their own self-interest is saying, I don't want to be exposed to other peers of mine, right? And so when they come out and they're not gaining their points, they're also a lot of times not engaged because we've actually used this, again, maladaptive attribution that has not only taken them away from the desired behavior we want, but it's also decreased their motivation to do anything within that setting. Okay. So do we have any questions there about that, Joanna, in the chat? I don't really see the chat. So, okay, good. Um, so, so goal-directed activity is important. So we have to identify what the goal direction that the student has. Okay, so how do we do that? So how do we do that? How do we identify what that goal directed behavior is? Okay, so in order to do that, I'm gonna pause for a second and do a little segment of the professional development I like to call story time. A student of mine this past semester, we were just kind of opening up face-to-face classes, and a student of mine came to me after one of our first classes and said, Dr. Eckler, um, um, what can I do? How many classes can I miss and still pass the class? Right? Now this is college, so it might seem like a little ridiculous, but for this specific class, I don't take attendance. The attendance is not a part of the grade or anything. But I explained to him very patiently that he could miss as many times as he wanted. He didn't have to come to another class, and he could still pass the class. But to the extent of success that he would have in the class is kind of up to chance, right? Because if he's not getting the content, he's not going to be able to pass the assessments. If he can't pass the assessments, he's not going to pass the class. And so he kind of contemplated this for a while and said, I gave him some truth, and he wasn't expecting that. He was expecting a number right away, like, oh, you can miss 3. But he asked a follow-up question, and he said, but how many could I miss if I just wanted to pass? Like, I just need a passing grade. How many could I miss? And so for him, that goal-directed activity was kind of this bare minimum attendance. Like, I'm motivated, but I'm only motivated to come to X amount, right? Or I'm only motivated I'm motivated again to miss a certain amount. And he wanted to identify what that amount was. And we see this so often in our field that they don't get it. They don't get the actual goal directed behavior that we're trying to get them to do. Why do we want them to dress out? Well, so they can participate and engage in the content that we're delivering to them. It's not about the points that we associate with dressing out. It's about being able to move in a comfortable setting. It's being able to participate fully and engage in the activity that we're doing. Yet we constantly lean on the idea that if you dress out, you get points in order to grade. And I'm not saying that's true for everyone. Some people it wouldn't be true, but that's just an example that I hopefully, and just to kind of continue and close out that story, I explained to him that this class is not about a grade. I mean, we do a poor job of that in higher education in general. I'm really trying to prepare you for your professional future. And so if you're not here getting that content, you're not going to be a good professional. And that's what the approach that we should take with our students. At a very basic level, we should say, if you're not engaging in our content, my job, my job is when you leave this classroom, that you leave this classroom as someone that is considered physically literate in some way, whatever that is, wherever your focus and your curriculum is, we're trying to get them to leave as physically literate individuals. And so if that's the position that you're taking, then you need to communicate that with them. This is why I want you to dress out. It's not because if you don't, you're not going to pass my class. It's because if you don't, you're not going to be able to engage the way that you should or you could if you were dressed out. Okay, so the goal direction is a huge part. All right. Always ask yourself, okay, what did I just communicate with them, and what is the goal direction that I want them to go towards? The second definition, again, describes motivation as a process, but this time it furthers that understanding a little bit. It identifies that process as an internal one, right? This has major implications, because if the process of motivation occurs internally, which I believe it does, then every motivational process is unique. Each student's behavior and choices, or their goal-directed activity, going back to that direction, is shaped by their unique environments and their unique experiences. Therefore, the energy and the direction in which an individual pursues that goal-directed activity is going to be contained on this sliding scale. And that's why it's so hard to hit that moving target. That's why we find motivating these students so frustrating, because it's always moving and there's so many. I think in that survey that I mentioned, we had, I think, 9 secondary teachers fill that out, but that's not really, no, I think we had 15. But on that, we had teachers say that they had 60 students in their class, they had 40 students in your class, they had 20 students in your class. Imagine any of those numbers, 20 students. Each of them is motivated by a different thing. Each of them has this goal-directed activity that is helping and energizing them to move in a certain direction, right? And so to hit that is really hard. So how do we do that as teachers, right? That's what we're going to try to answer here in the next few minutes. All right. So one way, and this is just kind of a graphic of how this process worked, and I'm gonna try to go as quick as I can on this because we are kind of tight on time. So this is kind of how everything works in terms of motivation, at least at a basic level, right? So we talked about this motivation being this internal process, and that's why it's so hard, because everybody's unique. Everybody has this kind of unique circumstance, unique experience. So what can get lost when we discuss motivation, specifically in the education field, is to attribute a lack of effort towards a desired behavior as amotivation or demotivation. Oftentimes, students are just motivated more to participate in a behavior that you have decided as undesirable. So most of our time needs to be spent on creating an environment and including these personal factors that help encourage the internal process to move and energize the person toward the behavior that we desire, right? And so there are a number of things in terms of environmental factors that are at play here. Things like social climate, the feedback we give students, reinforcing factors such as the families, friends, and for us, the most important reinforcing factor is their peers. Let's say, okay, so usually we move from this kind of self-identification at young age and looking at a teacher or someone that's seen as a I don't know, an elder or a mentor in some ways, right? So at an elementary level, we're looking at those people to motivate us in this external factor. As we age and we move into adolescence and into secondary, into high school, this changes. It shifts from they don't really care as much about us, and any parent of a teenager would probably nod at this. They don't care as much about what we think and what we want. They care more about what their peers are encouraging them to do, right? And we probably know this in general as physical education teachers, right? So we have these external factors that help encourage this internal process, and then we also have these personal factors, things like value orientation, perceived competence, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, self-concept, self-confidence, self-efficacy. All of those things tend to rule more of our motivation and orientation and choice making as we age into adulthood, right? And so we kind of go through this cycle of we care a lot about what our peers and our surroundings are encouraging in terms of behavior, and then we move into hopefully into adulthood where we're really more aware, self-aware, and are able to make our own decisions and value what we actually want to do. So the challenge for us as teachers is to identify those factors, and that's what we're going to try to do today. Identify factors that are the driving force behind the students' choices. I've used the analogy so far in the slides of like kind of shooting at moving targets. I'm not John Wayne, but let me continue with that for a second. If we agree that students' individual motivation is goal-directed and is influenced by a variety of factors, including all of those factors I went over just a second ago, we either have to shoot a bunch of shots to hit that target, and we're probably going to miss a lot along the way there, or we have to attempt to try to make that target stationary, right? We have to try to attempt to make that target stationary. And how do we do that? How do we make that target stationary? The best way to make that target stationary is gaining information. And I mentioned this earlier, but gaining information about your students, actually knowing your students. And I'm not talking about knowing them being able to say their name out loud. Okay, that's one step of establishing a relationship. But knowing things about your students is the best way, collecting data on them. And I don't want to sound like kind of this big research, this big research undertaking for you. You can do things that are very simple. You can get a lot of information in very simple ways that will help you understand what motivates each and every student in your class, or at least get a collective understanding of what's motivating your class. All right, so let's look at this. I got an acronym that I'd like to share. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's not a new acronym. It's something that has been used in the past. Um, and I don't want to get kind of bogged down in the theoretical. But this is an acronym that is based in self-determination theory, something that some of you might be familiar with, or might not be. It might be the first time you've ever heard that. But it is essentially kind of the holy grail of motivational research. A lot of pretty much everything we know in terms of motivation is based on self-determination theory. In the notes for the presentation, when you get them, if you want to learn more about self-determination theory and all of the kind of subset theories that fall within that, I provided you a link in there. But most of the research within self-determination theory has looked at, okay, how do specifically from a physical education perspective, is how do we motivate our students to move more? How do we get them engaged in our content more? And then how can we increase meaningfulness and value in our content, right? And so this praise acronym is something that we've used and that we've kind of utilized in the past to kind of connect it with things that we can do to create an environment that is motivationally supportive. All right. And so the praise stands for, and I know you all can read, but I'll go over them real quick. The P stands for, we'll go all the way through: perceived competence, relatedness, autonomy, individuality, social support, and enjoyment. And so these 6 strategies, or they're somewhat constructs, right? Because they all work together, almost as if our sensory systems, right? All of our sensory systems work together so that we can process information and do certain actions. And that's how this works. All of these things work together in order to motivate our students. All right. And so these six strategies are helpful in creating any type of motivational environment for our students. And remember, that environmental factors and those personal factors is what ultimately lead to that internal process and hopefully reaching the goal-directed behavior that we desire as teachers. So let's go through these. Now, inside some of these, actually inside of all of them, there is a tool that you can use. And so if you want to use it, feel free. 100% free access. So most of them are Google Forms. Which I have found that for you all, I have found with the teachers that I work with, a lot of you use Google Forms. So that's why I created the tools in this format. Obviously, if there's something that works better for you, if you're still paper pencil, or if you're someone that likes to do something in Microsoft, feel free to use what I give you and then kind of convert it to that. I think JCPS encourages you to use Google Forms, or at least I hope so, because that's what I decided to do this for. Now, for some of these, I don't want to spend too much time going into the tool. I want to talk more about the actual word, right? The phrase that we're using. So feel free to go into those and check them out on your own. But I will try to briefly talk about them. So we're about at that halfway point. So I need to go a little bit quick. So the first thing inside of this perceived competence, so the P in praise, is obviously perceived competence is motivationally supportive, and it increases students' perception of their own abilities. That's what perceived competence is. If you haven't heard of that word, it's actually more important in terms of motivation than competence is. Perceived competence has a wide-reaching array of motivational supports, whereas competence has some motivational supports, but unfortunately, more people are going to have perceived competence if we do a good job as teachers, and then are actually going to be competent. Now, our goal is obviously to lead to competency in a variety of areas, but perceived competence is really what we strive for in terms of motivation. All right. So with this in mind, we as teachers need to ensure that we are including activities that students can feel successful in, right? Various skill levels within the class. Hypothetically, let's say, and there can be more than this, but like hypothetically, let's say there are 3 levels of skill performance, right? So let's say that there's below level, there's on level, and there's above level, right? Really basic. Um, so we have above level, on level, and below level, right? And so what we need to do with all of our activities, everything that we do in the class in terms of actual skill acquisition or content acquisition, whether it be knowledge, we need to, or performance, we need to level, okay? And so people use different terminology for it. I call it leveling. Um, Other people call it different things, but leveling is essentially with our activities, we need to have something for everyone to feel successful in. So, whatever your unit is, whatever your lesson is, whatever the activity is within that, you should have at least 3 levels of that. And so you always start on level. So you want to start on level. So if you're thinking of levels in terms of steps, that might be step 2, right? So I want to start on level. From there, I'm going to encourage, in order to increase perceived competence, I'm going to encourage students, and you do this by walking around and talking to them and engaging with them. Again, that'll lead us to another letter. But you level your activities so that there is an aspect of success for all students. So we identify who those low level, maybe participant or performance level students are, and we level our activities for them. Now, this might sound like so I have to come up with 3 different activities. No, you can modify the activity or the expectations or outcome related to that activity so that you meet and allow success to happen naturally for those students, right? So you start on level, whatever the activity or game or skill that you're teaching, and then you level it based on what you see in the classroom. And you don't necessarily have to say, well, you're going to be at level, low level, you're going to be at level, on level, you're going to be above level. As you see, let the student make the choice of where they're at in terms of leveling, right? So if a student thinks that they're on level, let them continue on level and then encourage them to move to whatever the activity modification you made to the higher level is, right? If they're at low level, let them continue to practice at low level and then encourage them to move up to on level when they're ready to move up to on level, right? A lot of times we do a bad job of encouraging or increasing perceived competence because we have this one thing that we're looking at in terms of outcome. But if we expand that understanding of what a positive outcome is by focusing in on, this is probably old hat for most of you, but focusing in on the process of skill acquisition, right? So, or even shifting from skill performance into skill understanding or skill utilization. If we shift the focus from that, then we increase that perceived competence because maybe a student can't perform the skill on level, or maybe they can't perform it at a high level, but their understanding of the skill can still be perceived as competent if they understand when to utilize that skill, when to perform that skill within a game, right? So if we can encourage students that way, we can increase their perceived competence. So a couple of things that we can do to increase perceived competence here in terms of attachments, and I'll let you see this here. So right here, this is a simple Google form. And guys, when you do Google forms, make them fun. Make them fun for the students. Don't be boring. Don't do strongly agree, strongly disagree. Make them fun. Okay, so here's a simple one that I've used in the past. This is invasion games. So this was a unit we did on invasion games. One of the lessons, or one of the little segments inside of that was rugby. This was a pre-assessment and this was a self-assessment. So this was something that they did before the unit started. Now, if you need to modify this to meet your students' needs, this is something I did at the secondary level in high school. So feel free to modify it however you want. But it says before this unit, and you just have a scale, make the answers fun. Don't be boring. Like I said, too often we're boring, right? Make the answers fun. It says, before this unit gets started, I'm familiar with the skills used in the sport of rugby. And so a 5 is on this side. It says, you might as well call me Richie McCall. If you don't know who Richie McCall is, you probably shouldn't be a 5, okay? Because Richie McCall is one of the greatest rugby players of all time, all right? And then on the other end, I have a rug in my house. Did they have something to do with that? Okay, so just make the answers fun. Yeah, it's not a comedian. I'm not a comedian up here, but make the answers fun so that you can get information. But what are you doing when you gain information about their perceived competence and their skills inside of this unit? You're gaining understanding of where they're at in terms of their perceived competence. And so when you get all the information back, you identify what students are kind of this on this lower end, you know exactly where you should level them inside of your activities, right? Because if I answered that, I don't know what I think a pendulum pass has something to do with a clock, then I know that you're going to be on a low level in terms of perceived competence. I'm not talking about competence. I'm talking about perceived competence. Remember that. If I know that they're at a low level in perceived competence within that skill, then I'm able to tell them, or when I introduce an activity that is practicing or a practice session that is working on that, then I'm able to start them on a low level and move them and progress them forward. Okay. But when you do this, you can't stop there because you're actually going to have a negative effect on their motivation if you stop there. If they don't get feedback on improvement, then you are in trouble in terms of motivating them in the future, right? So with that, kind of take me back to my PowerPoint. It's the same exact kind of format, perceived confidence, and this is a post assessment, right? And so this is a post assessment after participating in this unit, my overall familiarity with the sport of rugby, bam. So now at the end of a lesson or at end of a unit, you can say, okay, after you've done all this, after you've had all this practice inside of this, were the activities, was the leveling that I did inside of my units, inside of my lesson, was this something that increased your perceived competence? Does that mean that, let's say with this push pass right here, does that mean with this push pass, they can hit a target using a push pass in rugby 10 out of 10 times? No, it has nothing to do with that, right? Because again, we're looking at perceived competence. If you can quantify that they have gained perceived competence in a skill or in a unit or in an activity, then you can go ahead and say that they were motivated within that time frame to get better. Now, some increase in terms of skill performance is just going to happen as a natural because of practice. Okay, so just understand you're gaining again. The whole purpose of this is to gain information about our students and what motivates them. All right, so keep track of what you're doing inside of the class. All right, so perceived competence, huge. The next letter in our acronym is relatedness. So relatedness refers to kind of the social connections. I'm Mimi, I'm playing paper, rock, scissors with you over there.
So I am on another session and
I know, I was like,
playing paper, rock, scissors.
Paper, rock, scissors. What's going on? Again, this goes back to those environmental factors that are impacting our internal process. If students don't have a strong connection to our content, we need to make up for that. And how do we make up for that? We have to have strong relationships. We have to have a strong relatedness to the students and to us as teachers, right? And we have to do that in order to motivate them. A couple of tactics that we can utilize, such as individual conversations. How many times in your class do you have individual conversations with people? How many times? I know it's stress for time. You're stressed for time, and a lot of times we do this large group instruction, and that's really the only time we talk to our students, right? There might be a passing hello, goodbye, might be a passing instruction given, but really what we want to do is try to have as many individualized conversations as you can. Have task support students as they're performing the task as much as possible on an individual level. Don't do it as a large group. Don't say, hey, I see a lot of people not stepping in opposition when they throw. move around to small groups as much as possible, because again, you're emphasizing and you're encouraging this relatedness. You're connecting with your student. All right. Promote cooperation, showing caring, and then showing genuine interest. Right? Genuine interest. Y'all, our students can tell when we are feigning interest and when we have genuine interest. They can, just like we can, right? And so your genuine interest in them, beyond just delivering content to them, has to be there. All right. So this allows the teacher and the students to become more connected. And the more connected we are, the more seriously they're going to take our content. The more seriously they take our content, the more motivated they're going to be to learn it. On a macro level, relatedness can be increased by making our curriculum and units that you have planned for the semester connected to what students actually want to learn about. All right, so I'm going to break down some research here for you real quick. Research in the United States found that team sports is the #1 primary curricular design in secondary physical education. Now, I'm not going to call anybody on to see what you necessarily teach, but the research also suggests that despite the teaching of team sports, remember, we said it's the primary curricular design across the nation. Team sports and skill acquisition that is associated with team sports has no, again, I'm going to repeat this, has not been connected to any significant way, in any significant way, to encourage students to be active throughout their adult lives. Okay. No evidence suggests that it helps engage them. Okay. Now, they might be engaged in that period of time, right? They might be super engaged during whatever unit you're teaching inside of that. But a recent survey of college students found that, and this isn't in my notes, but I just read this recently, but found that the majority of college students, when asked about their physical education secondary experience, would have liked to learn more about fitness and would have liked to learn more about lifetime pursuits such as walking, hiking, and other movement pursuits like that. They would have liked to learn during their physical education experience more about that. All right. So I'm not criticizing anybody that includes team sports. I'm a team sport. I used to be a team sport athlete. You can see the basketball right there. I'm all about team sports in terms of playing them. But I wonder if we could do a better job of incorporating these other things that have a longer duration in terms of relatedness. Because if we can make our content related, they're going to have more buy-in in terms of our curriculum. Okay. In the slide here, what we have, and golly, I got 5 letters to get through and I got 10 minutes.
Hey, I have a quick question, sir.
Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to know, like, do you think those results were a situation of the kids saying that that's what they wanted to learn over versus, you know what, this is what we didn't learn. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Hey, we didn't learn that. It's one thing not to get taught something. It's another thing to actually want to get taught that because you just didn't have access to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that being kind of one of the flaws in that study. And to be honest with you, every study has flaws. Yeah. I think one of the good things that you could take away from that, and I 100% agree with you, that maybe if they were taught that, maybe if they were taught walking and hiking and all these other things, when they got to college and took that survey, they would have said, I wish I would have been taught basketball and some of the skills that were related to that, right?
I wish we would have been taught lacrosse or field hockey.
Yeah, or something, a team sport like that, right? And so, I 100% agree with that. I think the bigger takeaway for that is that the only thing they're getting? Is team sports the only thing they're getting? I'm not saying that we necessarily need to take all of it away. I'm just saying, is that the only thing they're getting? Because in a couple of slides, I'm going to talk about individuality, and a lot of times we say students, hey, PE1, you're going to get this kind of, I don't know if that's what they call it, introduction to physical education, whatever. We're going to get this holistic approach. But the holistic approach inside of PE1 is usually not holistic, and then they transition from PE1 to PE2, and it really ends up being a replication, right? unless you're doing kind of this a la carte PE where students can say, hey, I want to take PE, I want to take weight training, or I want to take these kind of very specific areas in terms of physical education, then a lot of times they're getting this replication throughout their high school career if they take PE. And it's usually team sports or individual sports is seen the most often.
Dr.
But I
Eckler,
100% agree with you, Brandon. Yeah.
would you like to have a few more minutes, extra minutes? I mean, if you need to go to 11, I think everybody, or even a few minutes after, that would be fine.
Okay, just so I can get through my letters, let's say I'll get through praise, and then maybe I won't go into all of our links here inside of that. So I'll let you all explore those links on your own. So the link inside of Relatedness is just a survey that you could give students that ask about student interest, student physical activity interest. Some of you may have done that in the past. I've always found that it is a good tool to use. Don't always rely on their number one answer, because a lot of males are going to say, hey, my favorite physical activity interest is football. A lot of them are going to say basketball. And so use that as a guide, but don't revolve your whole curriculum around it. Use it as a guide to what their interests are, and then utilize and leverage that for your own needs and what you have in terms of a vision for your program. All right. So make it related to what they actually enjoy. Autonomy, this is a word that gets thrown out a lot, but is super important. Actually, it's one of the 3 psychological needs that self-determination theory is based on. Autonomy is this feeling that one has control over their own actions. Traditionally, we see this in PE in terms of activity choice, specifically in middle school and high school, where we'll give students options and they get to choose maybe the activity they participate in, or the number of repetitions that they do, etc. But we can also support autonomy by allowing students to have a say in what they learn. I know it's hard, especially when you're planning, especially when you're doing some pre-planning, right? Some of that pre-impact work we do as teachers, it's very hard, but allow them to have some say into, if you do this 1 year, you'll already have, like, say you go into 9th grade and you do this kind of let's say a survey on, okay, what do you want our rules to be? What do you want our curriculum to look like? Whatever it is, if you do this 1 year, you're going to know what 9th grade coming up next year is going to at least have a good starting point for them moving into the next year, right? So support autonomy by having the students have some say so. So the link inside of autonomy is just a quick little again, another form that allows students to have some say in rules, consequences, expectations within the class. I did this inside, this is a really good one for middle school specifically. I did this inside of my middle school that I taught at, and I was so impressed with the veracity at which they attacked this this objective. Obviously, they needed some guidance along the way, but it not only gave them the sense of autonomy, that they had some say-so in their own education, but it also really increased accountability. I had students that would hold each other accountable for the rules, hold each other accountable for the expectations in the class. So I attached that short thing inside of there. And then the next letter, and we're getting close to the end, and I do want to leave some time for questions. I know that some of you will be able to jump in there, but some of you might not feel comfortable doing that. So individuality, much like autonomy, this is again essential for creating that environment that is motivationally supportive. But unlike autonomy, where we're trying to give them back some say-so, individuality is really on us, kind of puts the ball in our hands. We need to identify that we teach a collective, but we're actually teaching individuals. And so we need to understand that they're going to have likes, they're going to have dislikes that are maybe not aligned with us, and we're going to have to adjust our approach based on them. Okay. I think sometimes we get lost in the idea, and this might sound a little bit pie in the sky, but we're actually there for them. They're not there for us. So teaching them and really getting to know them on an individual and teach them and help them learn on an individual level is huge. In the notes, there is a little bit further explanation of what we want to do inside of this acronym, or inside of this part of the acronym. But essentially, we want to move from ego-oriented activities, so in activities that encourage students to compare themselves to their peers, and we want to move into task oriented activities. So you give them a task. If they perform it, then they were successful. They're not comparing themselves to another person in the class. We really want to focus in on these task-oriented, because those ego-oriented motivatees, they're already motivated. They're already going to be looking around at their classmates and comparing themselves. So you don't necessarily need to promote that. Really focus in for those students, and usually these are the individuals that we have trouble motivating. Is those students that are always asked to compare themselves to others, and they're always feel less competent, and then so their lack of motivation is due to, well, I'm not very good at this, why would I do it? Which is something we all do in our own life. Beyond that, individuality, create a space for competition and recreation. Okay, and recreation. Establish different game options, include various modifications and rule adaptations to meet the needs of both categorical game levels. So again, that goes back to that leveling. Have a space for them to play recreationally where the game has been simplified or the rules have been altered, and then have another space for them. And some of this might be challenging. You got to be creative with your space. I know some of our spaces are different than others, but have another place where we can have a competitive game, and another place where we can have a recreational game, and try to make those games as small as possible too, to increase movement. The S, I got to get to my last letter, so I'm gonna go through the social support pretty quickly. But it's imperative that we establish activities that incorporate socialization. Many of you have probably heard about activities such as walk and talk or highs and lows. These are activities that you can do at the beginning of class that really encourage and prompt socialization at a very basic level. But before you kind of go in and just say, okay, everybody walk and talk, walk around the gym, this is our intro, I would encourage you to have prompts for them. A lot of times, if it's just left willy-nilly, as they say, we won't have very focused conversation. And set some boundaries too. There is not a single person in the class that should be walking alone during walk and talk. We need to be together. Have a partner with you, have a group of students with you, have a prompt for them. You can have it posted. And it doesn't have to be necessarily content driven. It can be something that is engaging for them to talk about. Maybe something that's in kind of the light of social media at the time. Whatever it is, have them engage with each other. That's huge. And then finally, within social support, you need to, one of the barriers that I often get from teachers is like, they're always in these darn pocket computers. You know, I get pocket computers all the time. They always have their phones out and they always want a social network, and it's a barrier to engagement in my class. My advice to all of them when they come and tell me that is leverage it. Leverage it. If your school allows them to have phones, and you're allowed to have them out during certain times when a teacher says that you can, leverage it. Have them get them out. Have them use them. There are a number of ways that you can use them in class, whether it's just completing a Google form like one we've already done here. You can use them for that, or hey, post a video on our YouTube channel. Create a YouTube channel as a teacher, because you can manage all the comments and everything else inside of that, right? So have them use YouTube. It's okay. Use the tools that they have access to and that they want to use inside of the classroom. Obviously, you have to set parameters, you have to set boundaries, you have to support them in a way that is positive, but don't fight against the tidal wave that is the phone. Embrace it and start to leverage it for your own use. All right, so in this attachment, there's a little exit slip that I've used in the past. It's just about social support. You can use it, once a week, once every couple of weeks, but feel free to use that. It's just a few questions that you ask your students. Are you feeling supported by me? Are you feeling supported by your students, the other students in the class? Are you feeling support? Are you supporting other students? And then what can you do to help support other students in the class? All right, and our last one, and I'm so glad we got to it. I'm a little over, and I appreciate everyone bearing with me, especially you, Ryan. I see you down in my left corner of my screen. I'm so glad you're here. The last letter in our praise acronym is E. And don't all good PDs have an acronym? Is enjoyment. I can't tell you how much I preach this to my students. I'm sure Ryan would raise his hand on this one. But we as a collective education force, and I'm not just talking about physical education, we have taken so much of the joy out of what we do. I'm not saying anybody individually has. Some of it has been bureaucratic suck that has sucked a lot of the joy out of it. And many of you probably have trouble connecting learning, education, and enjoyment. Many of you probably say, wait a minute, Seth, the students are here to learn. Hey, they need to be moving all the time. Hey, they need to know the dimensions of a volleyball court. I actually had a teacher tell me that one time. Well, we can just look that up actually. But before you go off the deep end, I'm not saying you sacrifice learning for fun, okay? I'm saying, why can't it be both? We can do both. We can do both. We can do learning and fun. At one point in our lives, everyone that's on this call, or at least most of us, thought that our content was fun because we dedicated our professional lives to it. You know, think of all the meaningful educational experiences in your life. And at some point, you're going to land on the realization that not only was it beneficial, but you actually had fun learning it. And so think about the physical activities you choose to participate in now, for the most part. What's the common theme? It's enjoyment. And some of you might enjoy walking with your significant other. Some of you might like to go to the gym and power lift, or whatever it is that you like doing. We don't do things that we don't enjoy anymore as adults, right? For the most part. So we get to choose what we participate in, and we choose activities that we enjoy. And so enjoyment is huge, especially, again, if we're trying to create physically literate adults. These students that we have in middle school and high school, we want them to move and continue to be active. If that's our overall goal, right? We want them to continue to be active into adulthood. We have to start with enjoyment, because they're not going to choose to do things that they don't enjoy. And so we really need to get beyond this learn or enjoy and not learn. So beyond activity selection, we can do a number of different things inside of physical education. We can foster a space that is safe and is positive. We can encourage individual differences, right? We can encourage and support individual differences. We can have students explore movements, explore activity opportunities in our class and beyond our class, that hopefully identify what it is they do enjoy. This one always seems to me such a small ask, but is met with such large hesitancy from teachers. And I've learned that many teachers, and again, I'm not talking about just you all as physical education teachers, because I am one. But we live in this place where learning is void of enjoyment and enjoyment is void of learning. And when I put it like that, doesn't it sound ridiculous? Everything we learn should be enjoyable. Ralph Smedley, and if you don't know who that is, utilize your pocket computers. I'm going to leverage your pocket computers for you. And he once said, we learn best in moments of enjoyment. And so if that's true, if what he says is true there, think about that in terms of your own physical education practice. How many moments of enjoyment am I giving to my students? And I think the more enjoyment we can have embedded in our classrooms, the more motivation we will see in terms of student engagement. All right, and that's it for me. That's going to conclude my time. I in my notes, I had hopefully some time to ask you all about some of your motivational struggles and some where you have struggles in terms of engagement in your classroom. Obviously, I'm a little over time anyway, but if you're willing to stay on, I'm willing to stay on, and you can ask me any questions you like. But just remember, before I close this out and let Joanna kind of take the reins, being a secondary physical education teacher, being a physical education teacher, being a teacher in general is hard. And when we're trying to change a motivational orientation, like we are, like you all came to this professional development to learn about, it's a process. You're not going to take anything I gave you today, apply it the first week of school and see some dramatic change. It's going to take time, and you're going to have to apply these concepts consistently over a period of time. And I really do believe that the genuine change that we want can only be made by genuine effort and persistence. And so you have to have that if you actually want to change. So I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't get to hear as much from you all. I really wanted to engage in kind of a more of a conversation. I tried to pack this 3-hour PD into 1 hour, and it's hard to gauge what that's going to look like. So hopefully Mimi will invite me back to speak again, and we get to explore some more of these things in terms of motivational concepts, and hopefully I'm able to give you some more practical activities and things that you can do inside of your gymnasiums.
I would love to have you back, and I would love to continue this in either like the fall or the winter, have a continued conversation about this. I know that, like you said, you had a 3-hour plan and everything went south, and all people canceled and people shortened sessions, and I ended up crying to my boss and nothing happened. So let's, you and I stay in touch, and let's make sure that we continue this conversation.
Absolutely. And for anybody that's still on the call, this is not like a hollow invitation. Seriously, connect with me. I tell my students all the time, it's like, I'm begging you to connect with me because I want to help. I want to learn, and I can't do that without you connecting with me. And so whether it's a question or just saying, hey, Seth, this is who I am. I'm at this school. I'd love for you to come out and chat. That's part of my job anyway, is to come out to schools and hang out and see physical education teachers and see how my students can actually learn from you all. And so if that's something you're interested in, again, just connect, and you can connect anyway. You can, in fact, if you want, you can text me. My phone number is 859-816-1121. And feel free to just send me a text, and we could chat or get together in whatever format you really want.
Sir, excuse me
yes.
one second. Can you post your phone number in the chat?
Yes, I will.
Thank
yes,
you.
I will.
Okay.
Well, Dr. Eckler, we really appreciate your time today. A lot of great information. What I kept going back to is, as you were doing your acronym and going over all of that, was relationships. The relationships we build with the kids allows us to, hit each one of those.
Yo voy a hacer algún programa.
So thank you so much. Guys, you'll notice that I've dropped the validation question in the chat. And so it's a Google form for those of you who weren't with us yesterday. Fill out the Google form, and that's the way you get credit for the session. So thanks, everyone.
Looks like 9 out of 15 of you have already done that. So if you've not done the validation question, it's not very hard at all. Just go in and fill that out. If you can't get it to load, then email me.
Hey, Mr. Bellamy, I'm interested in how you say your first name.
Theophilus.
Gotcha, Theophilus. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Do you go by Theo?
Yes.
You should start making people. You should start making people say the whole thing because it's so cool.
In some settings, I do.
Okay, good.
Some settings, I do. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank everybody for your time, and like I said, connect if you need me, and I'm looking forward to the next time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.